It is the ultimate Tuesday. That's February 22nd, 2022. There are three of us, though, in the Pick Six podcast today. Sam McKewon, Jimmy Watkins. I'm Evan Bland with the Omaha World-Herald. Back for another week of As the World Turns in Nebraska athletics. We have, a men's basketball team that's limping to the finish of the season. We have a baseball team that underwhelmed in its opening series at Sam Houston. We're still about a week away from spring football and getting going with a whole fresh batch of storylines and faces fueled by the transfer portal. Lots to learn there. We're going to talk about all that. Before we get into all that, how are you guys doing this week? It's like negative degrees out after it was spring earlier in the week.
I'm doing pretty well. I would shake your guys' hand, but I don't want to start a fight.
That was I think about halfway between throwing it and landing it, I think he changed from a punch to whatever that was.
Well, I think the thing that riled people up is when he came back, he had a closed fist.
Yes.
When he pulled it back,
I think he was ready to punch.
Why people
and
thought,
then when he came forward, it was like, if you watch it in slow motion, it kind of comes out.
Yeah. He just kind of grabs. I got your nose. One of those.
such a. So I can go, just briefly, I can think about those things two different ways.
Same.
The first way I can think about it is, what I would describe two coaches being petty at the end of that game. Pettiness boils over, guys throw a couple of punches, and it's probably over then. You just kind of, but that's not the world we live in now. The world we live in now, and I'm not saying that what Juwan Howard did was okay. I'm saying 50 years ago, those things were settled a little bit differently. Now today, you don't do that. I don't think what Greg Gard did was okay. I understand that what he did was nowhere near what Howard eventually did in punching the Wisconsin assistant. And then, Howard, that's just, that coach was not the person who stopped him and wasn't the coach who told the timeout. So to me, that was kind of he got the suspension he got. But you can think about that two different ways. Chattel was writing in his first downs on second guesses. Well, the hockey players after the game, they hang, and I'm like, well, they do. And then during the game, they fight each other, and they bloody each other's noses. And so at the end of the game, it's that stuff is there's an agreement there between there's literally sports where people fight, MMA and boxing. So it's I don't know. It was obviously wrong and inappropriate for 100 different reasons. And but yeah, that was interesting. How am I doing? Well, I spent all weekend covering a story that I didn't think I was going to cover. And it's a story, it's kind of a negative story about a team that has otherwise been a real feel-good story this year. And so, any time that it's what you call an off-schedule breaking news, it's I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about a lot of things about the women's basketball program in the last 48 hours. And so anytime you do that, you just this is the weekend. This is certainly not about me, but this is the weekend, and now I'm okay. And I woke up Saturday morning, and I get a text. Something's going on. And then it goes from there. So, and we don't know where it's going to go at this moment.
Well, I guess get into that a little bit. What we know officially from Nebraska is that their assistant coach, Chuck Love, is suspended with pay.
That's right.
Correct? Currently. Their player, Ashley Scoggin, is off the team, has been removed from the team.
For the whole season.
For the season.
Yep. This is in Maurice Washington. Might come back, although Maurice was never going to come back. But you remember how they framed that? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe
they left the door open.
That. No.
So how can you sort of frame what we know and maybe what this means for this team that, like you said, has had a very good season so far?
In journalism, there's things that you report, and then there's things that you can't report yet, and then there's things that you don't know. So that second category is tricky because there's things you feel like you really know well, but yet are not going to report because there's a standard in journalism that we adhere to, that message boards don't adhere to, that Twitter doesn't have to adhere to. And so what I can say is that, Chuck Love's suspension and Ashley Scoggin's removal from the team are connected. And we've gotten that from multiple sources. There's a lot of rumors and perceptions out there that may not be accurate. I think there is a chance that she is still going to tell her side of the story, whether it is to me or to another news outlet or on her own radio show, Splashly for 3. My sense is, as of this moment, I don't know. We're recording this at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday. She was supposed to. On Sunday. There was a real sense that this was going to happen tonight. I think that may not necessarily be the case. Like, I think that it may happen still tonight. It may happen a different day. It may happen next week. I think I'm comfortable saying that everybody tries to reach out and say, well, we've tried to impress. Hey, we think it's important that professional reporters who've done these stories before can be helpful in this regard. I think they can. Not that the radio show that'd be a good place too, but once you say something on live air, it's there, and so that's kind of where it's at. The questions that I've gotten the most are, how can the coach still be technically a part of the team while the player's been removed? Well, there's certain things that a coach would be involved in as relates to a contract that you would have to at least look through. Obviously, the coach didn't resign. We know that because he didn't resign. So, didn't resign, so they didn't quit. And obviously, at this point, don't intend to resign because they haven't resigned. The player was removed. Nebraska's told the NCAA that she's not coming back this year, so the NCAA knows that. And the reason you do that is because the NCAA tournament committee will consider, well, is this player going to come back? Are they hurt? That kind of thing. So Ashley was a starter. She won't be returning. I think it's a reasonable question. And I asked this question on Sunday of Amy is, do you feel confident about the process that removed her? Because it was swift. And it was immediate. And she didn't really answer that question, which I understand. Brent Wagner from the Journal-Star asked a good question in like who removed her from the team. And Amy didn't want to, didn't answer that question. So there's a lot of people involved. That's accurate. There are. So it's a situation where there's a lot of things that I think I know, but there's details that are still sort of left out, and until those are completely filled in by somebody, whether it's Nebraska or by her, or in theory by Chuck Love, it becomes really hard to. But when I've talked to people about what I think's going on, the reaction changes from what they imagined it was to a little bit different. And that's not to say anything about it. It's just to say that there's a complexity here that oftentimes message boards or Twitter or people's imagination will miss. And so we'll see how it resolves. I can tell you that the team, because the players were up there on Sunday talking about the New Edition song that Amy Williams likes so much, Can You Stand the Rain, they feel unified. They feel unified in this process. Like, they clearly feel like the right decisions were made, or at least those two players did, but I think they were speaking for the team. I think that's accurate, that they're speaking for the team, and that the way that they played on Sunday would indicate that there was, something lifted off the team's whatever. Not that that's always the point. Not that what you do on the court is always the point. It's not. There are people and their lives involved here, and we have to be sensitive to that. But we'll see where it goes. Like, that's kind of the update. I know that's very vague, but yeah, I think it's a tough moment for that program. Not only from just like a human moment, but also for just where they are in their season. They're not playing very good teams the next 2 days. Wisconsin and Northwestern the next 2 games. Nebraska will be in the NCAA tournament. I feel very good about that. What else is going to happen? I guess we'll find out.
So, is there some uncertainty in your opinion as far as can this? I mean, obviously she's been one of their best 3-point shooters. It hurts them in that sense. Mm-hmm. But could there be sort of a galvanizing effect too, where a move like this doesn't hinder their efforts moving down the stretch here?
People will say that, and it's not that wouldn't happen. It felt like that on Sunday. I said this on another radio show. Minnesota plays a certain way. I appreciate Lindsay Whalen. She's similar to Fred. I think, a little bit in the sense of Lindsay Whalen's going to play the way she plays. And the way she wants her program to be is a way that Nebraska can beat right now because Nebraska's got better players. But she's going to run and do all the things that they do, and it led to a lot of easy baskets. There are other teams that are challenging to Nebraska because they're ball dominant dribblers who just dribble and 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 dribble, and they either shoot or they dribble so long that they finally kick it out for a three, and it's either made or not. And Penn State made 12, and they won. That's kind of why they won the game. And Nebraska struggles with those teams. A lot of teams struggle with those teams, but Nebraska in particular can struggle with teams with ball-dominant players who just, bleed clock and do all those things because Nebraska wants to run. So Nebraska looked good on Sunday. They're going to play a game at Wisconsin here tomorrow night. That may not go that well. I think they're going to win it, but Wisconsin will slow it down, and then Northwestern plays a certain style too. So you never know. On the right day, with the right vibes or whatever you want to call it, Nebraska actually is a legitimate Sweet 16 contender if they don't fall on the 8-9 line. For people who don't follow a lot of women's basketball, falling on the 8-9 line is trouble. Number one seeds almost never lose. It's like 99% win their second round games. It just doesn't happen. So they almost never lose. They're usually way better than even the 18th best team in the country. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. They don't want to fall on that line. If they can stay above it, great. The sweet spot is 6-11 because your six seeds and your 3 seeds, not much difference. Basically the same team. There's very little margin between 3 and 6. Honestly, there's very little margin between 3 and 11. The margin between 3 and 11 is smaller than the margin between 1 and 3. That's been my experience. Other people may disagree with that, but your number 1 seeds tend to be way better than your number 3s in a way that, So you'll see upsets in the women's tournament, but it's usually 12-4, or 12-5, even 12-4, 11-3, 10-2. That happens all the time. But ones, they almost never lose. So we'll see.
One team that is not worrying about falling on the 8-9 line would be Nebraska men. The struggles,
smooth transition.
The struggles continue there. They have 5 regular season games left. 4 of those on the road. Northwestern up first here tonight. At this point in here, what's the vibe, Jimmy? You're around these players. You're around Fred. I know he's been sick. What's the vibe as they're playing the string out on this thing?
The vibe is everyone in the building left on Friday. Every fan in the arena, by the time we were walking to the locker room, by the time everyone had sent in their instant gamers or whatever, heading to the press conference room, most of the fans left were Maryland fans. There was I remember there was this girl clamoring for Fats Russell after he had done his TV interview, and besides that, it's a lot of janitors sweeping rows. That the timeline was advanced. It was so strange. And I wrote this in my gamer after the game. The last 3 or 4 minutes of that game, it was like a pickup game. You could hear all the shoes squeaking and the dribbling, and you could hear the ball hit the rim, all that stuff that you're not used to hearing in the Division I college basketball game. These fans are fed up, man. And this is a fan base. We talked about this last week. It's a loyal fan base. They are starving. They want so badly. It's not like a fan base that is scarred or vindictive anyway. They want so badly, 14 wins, something to get excited about would be enough. They've completely swung the other direction. It's when you lose the fans, it gets dicey. It gets really, really dicey. The fans are the direct link between the team and the athletic department. You don't think that Trev Alberts cares a lot that this is happening. This happened twice, 2 home games in a row now. Northwestern fans were gone halftime. Not as many, but they started to leave. Maryland, I think they started to leave, I don't know, midway through the second half or something, but a lot more of them left. So the vibes around the program, they are quite low. They need some reason for optimism. They need to do something these last 5 games. They have to.
I was just going to say, what can change that narrative down the stretch here? Is it just getting a win? Is it being competitive?
I think, win games. like plural. Like I think that's where we are.
They're playing Northwestern tonight.
Yeah, they're playing Northwestern tonight. They play Penn State, who, by the way, went 2-0 last week and has really tough
good.
place to play at home.
Yes.
I wouldn't
They
call
got
them,
a couple guards that are
yeah,
good.
right? And they play like we were talking about a certain style. Penn State, they're going to dribble the air out of the ball, so that's not easy. But
Which isn't the worst thing for them.
exactly.
Right.
But I mean, it can take Nebraska out of their
Yes,
deal, which
it
is So I think we need to see tangible progress at this point. We need to see reasons. At this point, we need to see reasons to keep the infrastructure together, because right now it's just speeding so far downhill that I don't know. It's really bad.
Like we've had the debate before, and we don't have to have it again about Fred's buyout and like what they'll do.
Right.
But like, if he stays, the case for hope next year is like the same case that it's been built on the last 3 years, right? Which is the next class, which is the roster overhaul, all this. Like, it just feels like, and maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like it's the same carrot that's been out there for 3 years.
I don't think you're wrong. Sam and I were talking about this on the phone yesterday. Senior Day is this Friday. We don't know who's going to be going. Like the smart move is probably just to send everyone who might be able to walk, which is like 6 or 7 dudes out there to walk. And if all those dudes leave, I happen to think that a lot of the dudes who can leave are going to leave. Then, like Evan said, we're in the same exact place. And I think I told Sam this last week. This is not me giving my opinion on what Nebraska should do with their coaching situation, but given what they are going to do this offseason anyways with the roster, there's probably not a ton of difference other than you might lose the recruiting class that they brought in. Like, if you're restarting anyways, you're restarting with a new coach, you're restarting with the same coach. So there's, like, to Evan's point, the reason for hope is just, they got a bad batch this year. The NBA, they signed a bad batch of NBA free agents, as Matt Abdelmassi would like to put it. Next year, they're going all those guys, a lot of the guys that haven't worked out the last couple of years, they're going to be gone, bringing some new guys. So I guess the case for hope is that there's sort of an admission. There will never be an actual admission, but by virtue of how the roster is constructed and who leaves, who doesn't leave, there will be admission. Okay, all this didn't work, but we're going to do the same thing and hope it does work. You ever seen that video where I forget which movie it's from, but it's like it's the guy who is, and this is how I know him, the guy who's the bad guy in Alvin and the Chipmunks, the live action movie, and he's saying well, it never worked out for those people. These people have all done the same thing. It never worked out for them, but it might work for us. It might work for us. That's where we are right now.
Jason Lee? No, I can't remember.
I don't know.
I've never seen that one.
He's a bald guy.
So let me insert just a small thing here that because we can do some post, it's not quite over, but post-mortem stuff, because things can move fast after. Thing number one, I actually think the team, this sounds so strange, is a little too old. I think that a lot of these guys have been around, and some of them are now in like their 6th years or 5th year. And I've had this debate with Evan many times. I feel like and JoJo Doman was an exception to the rule. JoJo had a great senior year. I feel like a lot of times, after about 5 years, guys just got to go. Whether they could come back or not, I think again, love Will Honus. I think it's a good thing Will Honus transferred to Kansas State. Like, you just got to go. It's time. College is a short part of life. If you're there for 7 years, you better be a professor.
Or an aspiring professional.
Right.
Yeah.
So the challenge I think they got a little old. And I think part of what happens when you get a little old is you actually have a lot of grown guys who kind of all have their clocks running out, and they're all trying to do something for themselves. And this isn't a criticism. This is Alonzo Verge's trying to do something for himself. Kobe Webster's trying to get to a place where maybe he can have a couple years overseas so he can become a coach, because Kobe Webster's going to be a coach if he wants to be a coach. It's obvious. Trey is in his 5th year, 3rd year, 4th year? 4th year. Got hurt, all of that. If you look at some of the young players on the team, the guy that's actually kind of gotten a little bit better is CJ. He's gotten better. Well, he's only a 2nd-year guy. Bryce has improved over the course of this year. He's a 1st-year guy. Lat, man, again, I like Lat. I have a lot of respect for Lat's story. Lat probably peaked. He probably did. And that happens. Like, even if, so people will be like, well, this guy's going to leave and this guy. I'm like, well, when you only win this many games, maybe it's time. Like, I think the funny thing about this team is I remember before we hired you, Jimmy, they touted we're going to be old. And I thought, oh, they're going to be old. Oh, experience. They're actually a little too old, I think. I think these guys are kind of like, they've been through the wars for 5 years, and now they're just sort of, I think you just kind of get a little worn down. Derek Walker, this is his 5th year? 5th? Thinking about a 6th, and I'm like, I remember, Matt telling me that last spring or something. Well, he might come back for a 6th. I'm like, really? Like, how many more years? And it was like, oh, he can get his master's. I'm like, well, that makes sense. But how many more years do you want to do this? Like, because I think it wears on the body and all that. They're a little old.
And losing wears on the mind.
It does.
Yeah.
And then I actually think some of the players that they've recruited to come into the next class are not one and dones.
I agree.
They're not. Like, Bryce may be, but some of these guys that are coming in are not. And it's going to force, if Fred were retained, it would force him to develop. And that maybe they should have done that from the very beginning. And then the other thing is, Fred can plausibly say, and again, I'm not saying he's going to come back because I don't think that may happen, but he can plausibly say, I'm starting over with my coaching staff. I see now that, like, 2014 Iowa State model wasn't going to work here. And I got caught. I got caught thinking the same old thing was going to be the same old thing, and I was wrong. If he can do that and he can say that to Trev and say, you know what, I got this thing figured out. I just need different people in different spots, and and I'll engage and be all that. Then that would be one thing. But to me, the toughest argument, the biggest argument against retaining him is just his own, what he's given off. Like,
I think also, if your solution to the problem, which is kind of what I just said, and you piggybacked off, if your solution to the problem is restart, 3 years in, you've won 21 games. Like, how reasonable of an ask is that for a fan base to wait again and and change the timeline again? And so if they restart again next year and they win, 8 or 9 games, 10 games, well, we're really young. You can't look at it as we're on our 4th year. And you know what? All that would be true. But man, it's a lot to ask out of these fans who are already showing that they don't have any patience for this anymore.
Again, like, it's counterintuitive to say we'll probably be a much better team because we'll have some guys who aren't here anymore who are too old. But the thing that concerned me most coming out of, and you asked these really good questions after the game, he said we got to be perfect, and you picked up on that, and that was good. And you said we got to be perfect. What do you mean by that? And he goes, well, we got to play great, Jimmy. And you said to win in the Big Ten, and his response was like, yeah. And this is just my opinion. We got to be perfect is not a message you want to send your team. I don't think that's the way that you can look at it. I think if you go into a circumstance and you're like, guys, to win tonight, we got to be perfect.
No pressure.
You better be playing Gonzaga.
It's well intentioned. I think what he meant to say.
We got to be Villanova 85.
Right. What he meant to say. What he meant to say was the second thing he said is we have to play great, which is what every coach would say in the Big Ten. We have to play really well to win conference games.
No, what he meant to say is we got to be perfect because that's what he said.
I think that's what's in his head. That's what came out. Mm-hmm. But what he wanted to say into that microphone, what would have benefited, like what he should have said, I guess is what I'm saying, is we have to play very well. Yeah.
No, what he said was really notable because I think once that gets in there, we're not going to win unless we're perfect tonight. It's just you can't, as a coach, conveying that is just really, really. I think it's just in there, like it's just rattling around, and I think it's taking a toll on him. And like I just don't see a person. I just don't see a person who has the. Now they may have to let him go, but I just don't see that. I don't see like somebody says that. I don't know. Will like contrast that with Will Bolt's response, like all weekend. It wasn't panic. It wasn't rage. So I actually think, and I actually think Scott's been better. Now Scott Frost can be on the other side of the ledger a little bit, but like he's right when it says we need to just win a game and we need, it's little things. That's an accurate statement. we got to be perfect when that comes out. It's just like, man, no, you don't. You don't have to be perfect. You got to play better than you are, but you don't have to be perfect. You can't celebrate after a dunk against Ohio State, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, let's talk baseball.
Yeah.
They had a good weekend. Sam Houston State takes 3 from Nebraska in the opening weekend. First game was a pretty darn competitive contest. Second one was won by Sam Houston State. That wasn't very close. Third one, Nebraska won. Fourth one, disappointing. Maybe the most disappointing of the 4. I don't know. But you listened to all of them. I think you watched the first one.
That was all that was available. Yeah.
And TCU is this weekend. TCU is a better team than Sam Houston.
Yep.
And you'll be down there. You'll be down at Globe Life Field. It's kind of a hell of a tough fix. I mean, we kind of figured this might happen, though. You kind of talked about this early in the season, playing down in Texas. Not easy.
Yeah, I think there are a couple caveats to look at it with. First of all, one, Sam Houston could be pretty good. They have a solid team. They have a really tough schedule coming up, so we'll find out. 2, northern teams typically start slow. Yes, Nebraska was able to practice outside in the preseason, which is unusual, but it's not unusual at all. I mean, we saw it with Michigan and some of your other top northern teams. It's just hard to hit the ground running right away and be really sharp. I think the thing that surprised me a little bit about the weekend was it wasn't one thing that was problematic. It was everything. I mean, the starting pitching was not good. The defense was shaky at best, and the offense was kind of toothless for a lot of the weekend. They struck out more than 40 times.
That's gonna happen.
It was like a 4-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio, which is just, as Will Bolt said, it's an immature approach, especially in college baseball when the name of the game's committing fewer mistakes than your opponent. If you're striking out, you're not even giving yourself a chance to let that defense make a mistake. So I'll be curious to talk to Will Bolt and the players later this week, because they were surprised by all accounts what they saw in the preseason and what happened in Huntsville last weekend didn't square up. So how much of that was part of the deal with an opening weekend being a northern team, and how much of that is who they are, we'll find out. But you look at TCU this weekend, they're a top 20 team. Long Beach State, which just took 2 of 3 from Mississippi State, they're coming to Haymarket in less than a month. And then Nebraska opens the Big Ten with Michigan, which I still think is one of the favorites to win the league. So, we're going to find out pretty quickly where they fall on this scale. But, when you look at Nebraska and other teams over the years in college baseball, whatever lineup and rotation teams put out there in mid-February oftentimes look much different by the time you get to April and May. So, I think that's part of the challenge, too, is them just figuring out, okay, if they really are as deep as the coaches believe they are, what are the best roles for these guys? What's the combination of the lineup supposed to look like? Can these starting pitchers settle in? I think that's the biggest immediate question. So certainly not the start that you wanted, but as Will Bolt said afterwards, one weekend's not going to ruin their season with 52 regular season baseball games to go unless they let it.
Tell me this, of the 4 starts, which was the one you were like?
I thought the first one wasn't good. I thought Kyle Perry. I mean, he was the ace. When your ace doesn't get out of the second inning, that sets you up not in a good way for the weekend.
Did Bolt make him throw too many pitches?
I don't know. I mean, in the majors, you don't want a guy throwing more than 30, 35 pitches in an inning. That's usually when someone gets pulled. So he was on the upper end of that, but everybody's healthy. You're trying to build up pitch counts. I think his overall total was in the 40s or the 50s. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't.
I'll look it up right now.
It wasn't egregious.
I'll tell you. By God.
62.
Okay.
Perry had 62 pitches. But that set him up poorly for the weekend, because then you got to go into your bullpen. They had a couple errors. And it's just weird to see Nebraska make errors because they were so good last year, especially on the infield. And so when you're giving away those runs, just not a good situation. But again, even when they fell behind, it's okay, now they can score, they can get back in it, but they never did. They're just, they struck out a lot. It was hard to get rallies going. Nebraska's going to see better pitching this weekend against TCU than they saw against Sam Houston. And so I think this staff is good at developing players, and more specifically, they're good at telling guys, here is a specific thing we want you to do. Like, hey, you are a speed guy. Get on base and take a free base, get a steal. Or you are a power guy. We want you to swing for the fences or swing deep. So, like, I think that's part of it when you're talking about filling in the role. Like, what, especially with so many freshmen, what do you do well? And then let's put you in a spot in the lineup to do that well. And I don't know that they had that figured out after week 1.
Kyle Perry gave up more walks than he got outs.
Yeah. Couldn't find the zone. It was cold, adrenaline pumps, all that stuff, but
yeah,
it was ugly. It was.
I think some of it is you have to, I don't know, this was an issue when Erstad just got there. Mike Anderson's last operation, last couple of years of the Anderson era, they pitched like, I don't even know what you want to call it, but they didn't attack. And they nibbled around the zone and all this other stuff. And so when Darren got there, it was still an issue of guys just not throwing strikes. Like, I don't want to throw a strike and get hit. I felt like there was a little bit of that. There must have been a little bit of that this weekend where it's like you can find the zone. You may not find it throwing exactly what you want, but throw strikes, and let our people have a chance to make a play. I'll be curious to see where it goes from there because let's see, how many walks did they issue? They issued 17, which, after 5 in one and a third innings, isn't that bad, actually. 12 for the next however many innings after that.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. And they had 31 strikeouts. Cody Frank was good. Okay, so the hitting thing. It would be fair to say that they went into the season kind of wanting their guys to hit the ball. Mm-hmm. Not do a bunch of bunts, not a bunch of... Again, this is one of those deals where you can say, you can hit the ball. It may not do what you want it to do, but you can at least put it in play, and they didn't do a ton of that. They struck out a lot because they were trying to hit the ball where they're not, hit it far. Doesn't it take a couple weekends to work that out when you're switching to that?
Sometimes. I mean, they didn't hit any home runs on the weekend, so 4 games, no home runs, only a handful of extra base hits. They've talked about, this idea that I didn't really thought about this until Will Bolt said it, but one of the things about getting outside is the hitting aspect of it, because when you're inside, you're just in the cage, and it's sort of this tunnel vision thing, and you don't exactly know kind of how these balls end up because you're in a really confined space when you're hitting it. So, that's part of it. The skill sets of the guys are different. Like, they just don't have as many... of the Mojo Haggies or the Hallmarks or guys who can lay down bunts and try to beat out hits. And they have a couple, and maybe those guys will get in the lineup. But it's a different sort of deal. It was cold. It was the first weekend.
Yeah.
You can make excuses for them, but the fact is, last year after that clunker of an opener, they got going against Purdue and didn't look back. So, like, again, when I look at the schedule, to me, it's like we're going to find out really fast where Nebraska's at with this stuff, because the level of competition, they're not facing Peru State, they're not facing Northern Colorado,
right.
These teams where they can rack up these wins. And this staff, like the way they treated that league only year last year was like, every game counts, we're putting out the guys that we trust. And this situation is sort of the same, where this is when you build up your postseason resume, is right now in this early part of the year. They're going to put the guys out there that they trust. And if those guys don't come through, then maybe the preseason projections for what everyone thought this team was need to be adjusted.
Same 3 starters for this week? Well, first 3 games.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, Perry and Shanneman have been their guys all offseason. They've both pitched well in big moments for this team in the past.
Right.
McCarville is as experienced as anybody. He was on a regional team at Grand Canyon, so I wouldn't expect him to make any changes.
I wanted to ask you, you made the point about the early in the season. It's not like TCU's not just better than Sam Houston State. They're much better, right? So when is the appropriate time to actually start worrying about the bigger term picture and recalibrating those preseason projections?
Well, yeah, I mean, if they get swept this weekend and it's ugly, then you probably need to revisit some things. If you take a game, even if you take one of those 3 games against a team like that in a neutral site, that actually helps your postseason resume. I think if you take a game and you're competitive, you can live with that. They wouldn't be happy with that, but you can live with that. If you get swept and it doesn't look competitive, or it looks like it did last weekend, then you probably need to make some assessments. And, like, again, in college baseball, it's pretty standard. Like, the lineup and the rotation oftentimes can change quite a bit. So, like, if they're 1-7 after this weekend, you probably are going to make a few changes. I don't know what those
4 this weekend. Or 3.
3. Okay. So they're 1-4, or I'm sorry, 1-6 after this weekend. So we'll see. But it does change the tenor of things, right? Like we've talked about this before, where Nebraska baseball is sort of it's left over from the psyche of the fan base from football and basketball. And right now, as you said with basketball, Jimmy, people are so starved and so looking forward to baseball that there was even a little extra frustration, I think, from the fan base with how that first weekend went, because they thought it was going to be a relief, and it ended up being more of what they've had in those other sports.
Yeah, I think the bigger concern to me would be the pitching, like of the two. I think the offense, if you're going to go with this style where you're not running a lot of plays out of a playbook and you're not doing these, double steals or hitting runs, and you're not asking players to fit a template, they'll get it figured out. I think over time, your guys will, the guys will start to, or stats teams would get there.
Mm-hmm.
The pitching, I think, is players have to. I will say this: in the Dave Van Horn era, you remember it, so do I.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Van Horn would not have let somebody throw 62 pitches.
Yeah,
I just don't think he would have. I think he would have walked out there after about 15 of them and said, "Get the hell out of here." Maybe you can pitch later this weekend. Maybe I'm being unfair to Dave there when I say that, but Dave didn't screw around. Like it was, you're not throwing strikes today. I don't need you. And maybe that's harsh, but I saw him pull guys quickly because it's like the center quarterback exchange. All the times that Cam couldn't get that done over the last 3 years, it's like you can't run the play if you don't get the snap. There's just not much you can do if guys aren't throwing strikes.
Of course, on the other end, he let Shane Comey throw 160 in a game once.
He did
back in the.
But that was also
when he was doing well. Yeah.
Well, the point being that yes, he did. He did do those things, but that was and he did the Arkansas pitcher last year.
Yeah, Kevin Kopps.
Yes, that is the other side of the pendulum. But the fact is that he based it on performance, and there were times when he'll pull guys because you're not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll be curious to see how that goes this weekend. Are these games on TV?
Flow Sports.
Okay.
Yeah, so you
they
can.
are.
I believe you can pay a small fee. It might be free, but I think it's a small fee.
Flow
And-
Sports.
Yeah.
Yeah, which you see a
So
lot with like
streaming.
wrestling and stuff
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
It's set up in a major league park, so you would think, God darn it, they're going to be able to get those on. One other quick thing I'd say about the pitching
It's
thing
better than BTN Plus.
is, oh yeah,
It
Low bar-
is.
low bar to
No
clear.
offense to BTN Plus.
Oh.
BTN Plus is okay with hoops.
Oh,
When you get in baseball,
give offense to BTN Plus.
it's
They're
o-
awful
for
in baseball.
baseball,
They're
yes.
awful.
Okay.
It's also like they're okay for hoops if the game is on a Big Ten network. Other than that, you don't.
Either
You're
of
not
you
getting
could set up
anything
with
from
your
it.
cell
I
phone
meant-
and
I
have
meant,
a better
yeah, like
broadcast.
Like the actual product itself.
Yeah.
Okay.
Either of you, if you had your phone and you just were in the stands recording it, it would be on par with anything BTN Plus does for most baseball.
That's right.
Outside of Nebraska and maybe a couple other schools. The only other quick thing I wanted to say about the pitching is I still think they can be deeper than they were last year, but what we saw in the opening weekend is they don't have maybe the star power that they did last year. Povich on Friday, Chance Roach on Saturday. Like the depth shows up in the midweek and in the fourth game of a long series. It doesn't show up on Friday night or in those big games. So we'll see.
I love Roach. I love the fact that he knew exactly who he was and he could induce all those ground balls. That's just such a masterful way of. He won games.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't blow anybody away. He didn't burn off a gun. He just won games.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate a person who can do that. Want to take a little spring football?
Let's do. So this is a game, or I guess we'll call it a game, an exercise that you came up with, Sam. So this is sort of who are players that we're watching this spring, and we're doing it in sort of a draft format. So anyone who's on the Nebraska football roster for this spring, we're going to draft a new offensive coach, each of us, 3 transfers, 2 returning freshmen / junior college enrollees, and then 5 returning players. And at the end of practice, we'll sort of revisit where it turned out, but it's sort of a fun exercise here.
For anybody who wants to see our position-by-position previews, they can do that. The Pick 6 podcast, we did videos last week with Jimmy. Each one of them is 5 minutes long. We figured that a lot of people who listen to this kind of understand the dynamics of that, so we wanted to do something a little bit different that kind of stimulates people's brains to think about, if you had to pick an 11 that you were watching, who is that 11?
I have a question to ask before we get started. Am I picking for guys I think are going to break out? Am I picking for guys who will create interesting storylines? How am I picking?
I would say the latter.
Okay.
Like, we're watching this
How I
as
built my board.
an interest.
Okay.
Like, not everybody's going to get Mickey Joseph. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the order is Evan, Jimmy, me, then me.
Snake style. Yep.
Yeah, this thing.
Okay.
So Evan's first. He gets to pick whatever he wants. Go ahead.
I'm on the clock. You got to have a quarterback on your team. I'm going to go Casey Thompson. And number one overall, the storylines are obvious. Will he win the job? The way he's come in, you'd think maybe he would be. Give me Thompson.
I'm going to take Garrett Nelson at 2. Probably a bit of a reach,
Wow.
but he represents something that Nebraska desperately needs. They need a pass rush. He sort of flashed a little bit at that spot last year. I think he had 2.5 sacks over a 3-game span. He's a guy he's a homegrown Nebraska kid. He is good for a meathead quote every now and again. He's one of those guys that they're looking to step up and become a leader, which is a prime talking point during this time of year. So maybe not the star power that we were expecting it to, but I'm taking Garrett Nelson.
I get picks 3 and 4. I'm going to start with the coach, Mark Whipple. The Nebraska offensive coordinator, I think, will be a dynamic, sort of game-changing person in that room. I think my understanding is he's a pretty brilliant guy who also has a way of thinking about the game that I think is good for Nebraska. I'm going to pick Mark Whipple. My first player selection, since I'm picking a player, is also a transfer, and it is Omar Brown, the transfer from Northern Iowa. I think he has a chance to be a very interesting player. He was a 2-year starter there, FCS All-American. They need a corner opposite Quentin Newsom, and I think Brown could be that guy.
The second pick, I guess I need to take a quarterback at this point. I'll take Chubba Purdy. The intrigue with him is that he's going to be around a little bit longer, right? It's Casey Thompson we expect to be a 1-and-done, maybe a 2-and-done guy. Chubba Purdy is the future, the guys they're going to look to lead the Huskers beyond this super high magnifying glass 1-year evaluation period. He's the guy that has hitched his wagon to Nebraska. He's got a familiar last name. That's people already kind of know who he is, even without knowing who he is. He comes attached to the Florida State brand. Quarterback, very important.
I like that pick. I'm more interested in him than I am Thompson. Definitely.
Well, I'm thrilled to get this particular position coach on the back end of this wheel. I'm going to go Mickey Joseph. He's already been a huge winner in the offseason for 2 months, really popular with recruits. If Nebraska can get back into the Omaha Metro, man, it seems like he's a guy who can do it. And now we get a chance to see what can he do to develop some pretty interesting talent already in the room. How much better can Xavier Betts get? How much better can Omar Manning get? What just the presence of Mickey Joseph feels like it can make a difference, and I'll be interested to see day to day in the spring what that does for the program and how that affects that position. And then I think for a player beyond that, give me Caleb Tanner. I don't expect that we're going to hear from Caleb Tanner. He doesn't really talk to media folks like us, but he was someone who, you talk about guys coming back for a 5th year, feels like he could make a big jump in his 5th year within the system. We talk about the importance of finding a pass rusher. It seems like outside of maybe Garrett Nelson, this is the guy who can be that for Nebraska. And if he can take that jump, suddenly this defense looks all that much better, even with a lot of new shoes to fill moving forward. So give me Caleb Tanner.
I'm dipping back into the transfer waters. I'm going Trey Palmer, the former 5-star recruit, LSU transfer, came over with Mickey Joseph. I've talked about it before. He's gotten in with Mickey Joseph. He already knows the coach. He's the only guy that has a built-in rapport with Mickey Joseph. That's important. He's a punt return / kick return guy. Nebraska has had 0.0 contributions, at least last year, in that department. That's important. And I know his receiving numbers at LSU were modest, but there's a lot of talent over there at LSU. I don't think we really know what Trey Palmer can do as a weapon. So I got Trey Palmer.
I'm going to go receiver as well, and Xavier Betts, who I think is the most talented receiver on the team, and it's my understanding that he's starting to unlock some of the things that everybody knows he can do. Xavier's always had an incredible amount of physical talent. He's a smart kid. I think putting those two things together has been a little bit of a challenge up to this point. But when that guy gets the ball in his hands, he is really explosive, whether it's running or catching. And so my first returning player is Xavier Betts. I'm going to go with another returning player for my second one. And again, these are players that I'm kind of watching. It isn't necessarily the best players on the team, so I'm not going to pick, for example, somebody like Luke Reimer, because I have a pretty good sense of what he's going to do. The next player that I'm going to pick is Ethan Piper. Piper will have a chance, I think, at a number of options on that offensive line. I think he'll get a shot at center. I think he could have a chance at guard. Piper is a smart guy. We know that. Mm-hmm. He was a well-rounded kid in school. He played some football for him in the last couple of years. He started a little bit. He got pulled. I think he's still around, and I think he may flourish under a Donovan Raiola. We'll see if that happens, but I think it's an interesting conversation with Ethan Piper. They're going to have two offensive linemen out of camp, so they're not going to necessarily be able to try every single person they want at center because they're going to have some people out there who play tackle. So I'm going to pick Ethan Piper.
I'm going to go back into the quarterback realm, and I'm going to take Logan Smothers, who is somebody that it's a face that everyone knows. He's kind of got like that tortured Nebraska vibe to him. He was a part of last year. He even got to participate in one of those epic fourth quarter collapses. And there's a lot going on. There's a lot at stake for Logan Smothers this year. If Chubba Purdy is solidified as the number 2, or Casey Thompson, Chubba Purdy are firm 1-2, what does Logan Smothers do for the future? He's also a fun watch. I mean, the guy can run as well as anyone on the roster. And I think watching what happens to him might also inform us a little bit about how much of a mesh are we going to see with Frost and Whipple's schemes, because I think Smothers was a firm fit for what Scott Frost wanted to do the first 4 years of this program. Maybe not so much of a great fit as to what Mark Whipple was doing at Pitt. So someone to watch.
Mm-hmm. My first JUCO prep early enrollee is going to be Anthony Grant, the running back who comes in at a position where there is some opportunity. Like Gabe Irvin, not going to be 100%, still coming off that ACL. A.J. Allen, the big 2022 signing day edition, is not on campus yet. So Grant, and there are other guys, of course, with Marquise Stepp and Ramir Johnson, but Grant's really interesting, given what he did at the junior college level. New position coach. Like, there's just a ton of opportunity there. Oftentimes in the spring, you can see someone like that pop. And again, with Irvin and Allen as guys who are threats, I think in the fall, this is his chance to get a head start. So does he take advantage of that and insert himself into that conversation late? I'll give you another returning player. I'm a big Henry Latufsky guy. I think on that line, when you talk about replacing at least 2 starters, new position coach, all this, Latufsky's a guy who just has all those intangibles. I mean, I talked with him a number of times when he was a recruit. He's got that little bit of a nasty streak to him. He can dunk. So he has the explosiveness. By all accounts, he's made a lot of physical gains in his couple years in the program. He's somebody I could see, especially he didn't need those injuries to Teddy Prohaska and Turner Corcoran to make a move in the spring, but I think he's in position mentally and physically to do that. So he's someone else I'll be watching.
I'm going with my first early enrollee. I'm going Jaden Gold. It was the top recruit in Nebraska's 2022 class. He comes in at a position where it sounds like there's going to be some competition. He's a guy that Frost had mentioned on signing day as someone they think that could make an impact quickly. He's got size. He's got speed. He's got 4 stars next to his name. He's the only one that has that. I'm in.
I like that. He's got size. He's got speed. He's got 4 stars next to his name. You could be talking about the Nebraska basketball team. Not going to make many shots. Ladies and gentlemen. All right. Sorry. I'm not a great person, Okay. So, one of the advantages here is neither one of us has to pick Teddy Prohaska and Turner Corcoran because they're not going to be in spring.
Yep.
So we're not necessarily going to be watching that. Who did I have next here? Early enrollee JUCO guy, Deshaun Singleton. So I'm watching the secondary. It's obvious with Omar Brown and then Singleton. I like Singleton's tape. I think he's got good tape, and usually when a guy goes to junior college to improve his recruiting stock and then is able to get out of there in a year, that usually means he's a pretty good football player. I know his finals were essentially Nebraska and Kansas, but I think he's got a real chance of playing early and wrestling away one of those starting jobs in the secondary at safety. To do so, he'd have to beat out some more experienced players. Obviously, Noah Pulla-Gates would be one of them. So, Deshaun Singleton is one that I'll be watching, and then my next returning player. So this will be my third returning player. Okay, this is a guy that's pretty good, and that's Ty Robinson. Now, Ty Robinson, I think, is a person who needs to become a leader like right now. So previously on the Nebraska football team, you had Damian Daniels, DeAndre Thomas, Ben Stille, and Jordan Riley. All four of those guys, all much older than Ty Robinson, all sort of seasoned vets. Ty was maybe the best player at times on that line. I think Damian Daniels was probably the best. But now all those guys are gone. And it basically falls to Ty Robinson and Casey Rogers to kind of lead that room. And Rogers is a little banged up, maybe a little banged up. And so I think Robinson is the guy that's probably going to have to take that room under his wing. You know, he was taken under the wing of Damian Daniels and Ben Stille, and now it's Robinson's turn to turn it over. I would anticipate hearing a lot from Ty Robinson this spring. I think we'll hear from him at least 2 times, maybe 3. The last time I spoke to him, he was the guy saying, put me out there on special teams. I'll get the job done. Yeah. He was so furious. And so I will say that Ty Robinson is my other next returning player.
I'll go ahead and grab Donovan Raiola at this point. That position group is, you could argue, the most intriguing position group heading into spring football. It's going to determine a lot about, like, we like all these pieces. We like all these talented skill players, the quarterbacks they've added. We're excited about a lot of that stuff. It doesn't mean anything if you can't keep the defensive line from spilling into your backfield or false starting or whatever, putting yourself at 2nd and 20s. So how he coaches that group up, how he has, again, as we've talked about probably a little bit too much in this podcast, handles the media, all that stuff matters a ton.
My next returning player is Nash Hutmacher. For a lot of the same reasons that you mentioned, Sam, with Ty Robinson, there's just not a lot left. You look at the transfer ads and the immediate talent that's brought in, there really isn't any of that on the defensive line, and so it's fairly obvious that they expect him to make that jump, and he's going to need to make that jump because they don't have a ton of depth at that position right now. And he's the guy in the highlight videos who's benching and squatting all this weight, and so I would imagine this is his time. He's been in the system 2 years now. It's his time to make that next step. What does he do with that? So give me Nash Hutmacher. And then I'm going to go with another returning player as well. Give me Isaac Gifford in the quest for who is the next JoJo Domann. Gifford is sort of at the top of that list, maybe with Javen Wright as well if he's healthy. But we saw Gifford get a little run last year. Can he be sort of that nickel guy or that that Swiss Army knife who can drop back into coverage or rush the passer the way Nebraska was able to do with Domann? It's possible they don't have a guy like Domann on their roster, given how versatile he was. But as much as we heard Isaac Gifford's name in the last year or so as somebody in that mold, it'll be interesting to see if he can take that role and run with it.
I'm going to take Kevin Williams. I think is my third and final transfer. He is an offensive tackle from Northern Colorado, an Omaha kid. And it's just, we have 2 presumed starters out at that spot. We also have new bodies coming in, which to me either says we're not so sure about these injury timelines or we're not so sure about these players. So I think that spot in general is something to watch, and he's a guy that has roots here. So I'm going Kevin Williams.
I don't think that we're going to be watching a heck of a lot. I think we're just going to hear that he's good, but punter Brian Buschini will be my next transfer. What fans should be listening for and what we'll be asking for is the reaction of teammates and the reaction of his coach, Bill Busch. Right. That's sort of like, yeah, he's good. Like, that's what you want to hear. You don't want to hear what you want to hear is, he's the guy we were hoping for. He's come in here and really done a good job.
You don't want to hear is he's still learning the rules of football.
Well, you don't want to hear like, well, it's an open competition, right. and we're working through a lot of guys. I'll tell you, these other guys are doing really like. What you want to hear is the guy that we gave the scholarship to is the guy that we thought he was going to be, And he's kind of weird. And you also want to hear people say maybe he's a little different or he's a punter or whatever. You want to hear that.
He's really intense.
Yeah, you want to hear something like that because then, you want to hear that like respect that they might have for him, that kind of thing. That would be something that I would want to hear. My next player is a returning player, and it's a player that I'm really focusing on, and that is Thomas Fidoni.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is a guy that they really need to be good. Like they put a lot of time and effort into recruiting him. He's got a lot of physical ability. He's got the cockiness. You want Thomas Fidoni to be a really, really good player, and hopefully your number 2 tight end. And your number 1 receiving tight end, I think, they'd love that. So that's a weapon that we haven't talked that much about, but is still there, and I think he has a chance to be really good.
Take Bryce Benhart for kind of the same reasons I mentioned with Rayola and Williams. I'm just paying attention to that tackle spot. There's a lot of action happening around there. He's a former 4-star guy. He was benched last year, came back. They played better by all accounts, but I want to know what's happening at that tackle spot. So I want all the draft picks I can invest in there.
I'm going to go with another transfer. My second transfer, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, the receiver. We saw what Nebraska did with Samori Toure last year and how he was able to break out as a new sort of single-year talent. And I think Garcia Castaneda, you look at some of his film, what he did in New Mexico State, he can be a game breaker at times. He can be somebody that, if he earns the trust of the quarterback, can, I think, contribute in a similar way to what Toure did last year. So coming in again at a position that's being totally remade under Mickey Joseph, where there's really not an established pecking order, just to see where he fits in the mix right away will be fascinating. I'm going to go with Javier Morton, the junior college edition, cornerback, partly because we're running out of JUCO and early enrollee talents. But, he had a really interesting story. Like, he was once committed to Alabama. He, took that junior college route. And sometimes guys can emerge from that and have great careers. Like, he physically he kind of reminds me of Tyreek Johnson in his story, and a guy who was really touted, took a kind of a road less traveled and came out the other side. We'll see if he, at a secondary that has a lot of openings.
Frost over here.
What's that?
Robert Frost.
Well, whatever.
It's
I'm
good.
interested in Javier Morton. Javier Morton. Give me Javier Morton.
I'm going to go ahead and lock in my second early enrollee. I'm going to take Victor Jones Jr., the 3-star receiver from Orlando, Florida. He's fast. We all like speed. Everyone Nebraska was a big play offense last year. They want speed. We want to see that. He's also another kick return guy. So that's something that, again, Nebraska really needs. Maybe Trey Palmer fills that role. Maybe Trey Palmer has too much of a role in the offense. They think he's too important. Maybe they need someone else to slide in there.
Right.
And Victor Jones could be that guy. Speed, skill guy. I don't have a ton of skill guys. I'm drafting a lot of linemen here. So I need some juice and the return game.
That's a good one. I will take for my final and early enrollee. No, we're just selecting 2 in early enrollees, correct?
Yep.
Okay. For my second early enrollee, I will take Ernest Hausman. I don't know. Ernest maybe has maybe the most upside of any of the players in the class. He's played a lot of football, but I think, he played at a level in Columbus where I think he was the best player a lot of the time. I think he's got a lot of potential. He's got a great frame. Maybe you can play him inside. Maybe you can play him outside. And so we'll catch up with Ernest at this point. He probably won't talk this spring, but I do think you'll hear something from Rude or probably Barrett Rude. Oh yeah, he's good. So that'll be my last early enrollee, and then I've got one more spot for a transfer, and I think I will probably go right back to the defensive back and select Tommy Hill from Arizona State. Tommy got out of Arizona State at just the right time because that program is in trouble, but he got out. And he's at Nebraska. This is somebody Nebraska wanted at one time quite a bit. And so he is, he's in a pretty good spot there. I think that's my 3 transfers, and then all I have is another returning player, and I'm good to go.
I need 2 more returning players, I think. I'm going Chancellor Brewington. Both because I love watching that man run around the end and take somebody's head off on a run play, and because we don't know who's going to be the other tight end opposite Travis Vokalek this spring. I think we all, like as Sam said, Thomas Fidoni is the leader in the clubhouse. I think Nebraska wants him to be that guy. But if we're looking to fill a receiving void in a tight end spot, Chancellor Brewington did arrive at Nebraska as a wide receiver and did prove himself on the field as a blocker last year. Fans love him. So I think that's someone who he's not the greatest interview, but he's someone that there's a lot of intrigue around. I want that on my team.
I'm going to go my last returning player. I'm going to go Marcus Buford, who got in on some special teams last year. I think he kind of gets lost in the shuffle a little bit with a lot of these other DBs that have been brought in through the portal and such, where they really liked him out of his prep school. And again, like I just think he has the mentality that Travis Fisher likes, and he'll be interesting to see if he can make a jump. And then, I have one transfer, and there's one more transfer left. So give me Hunter Anthony, the O-lineman from Oklahoma State, who was a starter there in 2020. Circumstances came up to where it wasn't that way for him toward the end, but he was part of a winning program. In talking to him, he has that mentality of a lineman. He's mature, and again, there's opportunity along that line, so it's there for him if he has a strong spring.
Am I allowed to take Gabe Irvin? Do we know if he's ready for spring ball? I know that was the plan.
I don't know that he's going to be 100% for spring, but whatever.
I'll take him. I'm taking him. I'm taking Gabe Irvin. We're at the end of the draft. We need some high upside flyers here, and if Gabe Irvin is participating in spring ball, there's going to be a lot of intrigue around him because he was supposed to be the starting running back.
He's going to.
That was the plan. That's what they've told us. I don't know. We haven't really talked about Gabe Irvin with the coaches in a long time, but the idea after his surgery, I believe they said they wanted him to be ready for spring ball.
That's a good point.
And it's the last pick. And I think this, again, I'm just looking for diamonds in the rough here. And I think Gabe Irvin, the potential storylines that could emerge around him are worth the value at this point in the draft. He is someone who's going to be competing for a job in a wide open room, new position coach and all that, and a guy who come back from an injury, there's always intrigue there. So give me Gabe Irvin.
I like it. I guess I got the last pick here. I've got to pick the 11th player. Well, if you're talking about storylines, I think running back is a big room. I think I'd like to at least watch a running back this spring. You have Irvin. You have Anthony Grant. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go ahead and take Jaquez Yant.
He was on my list as well.
Okay.
If you guys told me I was not allowed to pick Gabe Irvin, I would have picked Jaquez.
I'll say this: that this is a guy that outside of A.J. Allen, who's talented, maybe the most talented talented runner they have. Now Anthony Grant is a physical, big, kind of bowling ball kind of guy, and he's a good player. But Yant is a unique Eddie Lacy-esque player who's got a lot of fluidity for his size. I think that the issue they had with him is that he literally would execute the plays the wrong way at times. Like he wouldn't do what he was supposed to do. You'd see him going one way and Adrian going the other. Like it was a problem. So I think he's going to be a guy that either it happens real quick here in spring, and we hear Brian Applewhite, who is no nonsense. I talked to him for about an hour on Friday. He is not fooling around. He's very straightforward, and he loves his guys, but he's very straightforward about what he wants. We'll either learn really quickly that Yant is on board and ready to do what he's asked to do, or he doesn't get many snaps. And if he's getting snaps, that's good news for Nebraska, because I think we saw last year that when he's talented. Like, he can make people miss.
Yeah, I thought he was the most productive back, the most impressive back to watch last year.
Well, he can't catch, the question is, can he catch the ball?
Yeah.
I'm just running it, I agree with you, but then Ramir Johnson can catch the football, and he can do some things after he catches it. Yant's got to prove that. I thought about either Yant or Stepp, but I'll take Yant. Okay. And we all have 11. So we go through I'm going to go through the list so everybody knows it. Evan, Casey Thompson, Mickey Joseph, Caleb Tanner, Anthony Grant, Henry Luftowski, Nash Hutmacher, Isaac Gifford, Isaiah Garcia Castaneda, Javier Morton, Marquise Buford, Hunter Anthony, Jimmy, Garrett Nelson, Chuba Purdy, Trey Palmer, Logan Smothers, Jaden Gould, Donovan Raiola, Kevin Williams, Bryce Benhart, Victor Jones, Chancellor Brewington, Gabe Irvin. I feel like you've got more than 11, but you only have 11. And then me, Mark Whipple, Omar Brown, Xavier Betts, Ethan Piper, Deshaun Singleton, Ty Robinson, Brian Buschini, Thomas Fidoni, Ernest Hausman, Tommy Hill, and Jaquez Yant. Who was the only two early enrollees we didn't pick were Jalil Martin and Richie Torres.
Put it on the bulletin board.
Because there's too many quarterbacks on the program. There's nothing.
Right.
I mean, with Richie, you know it's a developmental deal.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be.
There's still value.
He's not going to start.
But there's still value in seeing him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But, and then the only transfer we didn't pick, we couldn't pick because Timmy Bleakroad isn't here yet.
Exactly. Everyone who's here we picked. Yep.
Everyone who's here we picked. And then there was a ton of guys returning-wise we didn't pick. And the only offensive coach we didn't pick was Brian Applewhite.
Who's plenty interesting, too.
He is. I think the other three are the most interesting, though, because Joseph is a former player, and you can tell Rayola's may have the hardest job on the staff. Like, this is a brand-new kind of offensive line, and a lot is being asked of him. And I'll be honest with you, he's been hyped up in a way that I don't think is very helpful to him. There's just been like, oh, this guy. And I'm like, what are you? It's the first job he's ever had.
How much of that do you think is in response to there was a little bit of, people weren't expecting him to be the guy?
I think some of it is that, and I think some of it is Nebraska wants, this is a really good. And, Sam Sledge, who committed this week, Sunday, really likes him. And I think there's things about Rayola that could be really good things. And there's high school coaches that want to go down and see what he has to teach. But, he's been presented as something that I think it will be hard for him to live up to. His job is just to be, part of that group. The guy that's got to resolve a lot of the issues for that group is Whipple and Joseph. Those are your two highest paid coaches. Those are the two guys that have to figure it out. And then Applewhite's got to get those running backs to a point where they're at an elite level, because Nebraska should have elite running backs. They've had them for a long time, until the last 5 or 6 years. So it'll be interesting to watch. And then among the player positions that we picked the most, quarterback was one, offensive line was another, receiver was another, running back was another,
defensive back.
And defensive back.
Yep.
Those are the groups.
No surprises there.
So we shouldn't feel good about the defensive line at all, but I think we all kind of feel like we don't really know what's going to happen there. Yeah. And it's almost like we can just play the two defensive linemen if we have to.
And it's hard to single out, like, this guy.
Right.
But
that's a question mark. Like, where are they coming with players? We didn't pick the inside linebackers, I think, because we feel good.
Yep.
We didn't pick the backup outs. We probably could have put Blaze Gunnarsson. That would have been You talk about pass rush. I think Gunnarsson's got some ability.
Yep.
We picked two tight ends, which surprised me a little. Three.
Replacing the guy who had the best tight end season.
Right. Well,
in
we
school
picked two:
history.
Chancellor Brewington and
Fidoni.
Fidoni. We didn't pick Vokalek, so we assume we know.
I think we know what he is.
No
Yeah.
commodity.
And he's not Austin Allen.
Right. No.
He's a better. I think he's a better blocker than Allen.
Yep.
And maybe not quite the receiver. So they may want to pair him with a Fidoni or somebody else. Well, there you go.
Mm-hmm. Should be fun. We're at that sort of nexus of the universe here, where basketball's wrapping up, spring football's coming, baseball's going. It's going to be fun, and there's never any shortage of storylines. So continue to listen to us. We consider it a privilege for your listenership. Stay warm out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Husker fans.